of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion, Professor Mthuli Ncube. And this evening we want to look into exactly, what the sum total of the budget is, what's the outlook for the year to come. And to help me do that, I'm very excited and happy as always to be joined in the studio by Pascal Mandeya, an economic analyst. Pascal, good evening, and thanks so much for honoring our invitation to come to the program this evening.
The pleasure and privilege is mine. But can I start by correcting? Economic analyst sounds like somebody seeking for relevance who is a political person on the side. I'm actually an economist.
You're an economist?
Among other things.
Amongst
but
other
yeah.
things.
Why I say so is one of the things that, this is not an advert, one of the things that I'm now going to do with a friend of mine who's coming from the public sector, running the country's biggest fund. We are going to try and do the things that we always talk about on radio. I've always been a consultant for 20 odd years, but now we're scaling it up.
That's exciting.
People would always say, okay, we see you playing golf, talk on Rasta, small scale, you live on a budget, but you come and tell, you say, we must do this, we must do, we must look for funding and whatever. So, this gentleman of mine is coming from the public sector when you're running, and we said, okay, fine, let's start talking about millions and billions, looking for funding, doing this. And unfortunately, we just started in terms of us working together. But we're getting into the deep end, because one of the things we will notice in the budget, surprisingly, is the government owed a lot of people money, and they just decided, you know what, via treasury bonds and bills. You remember blocked funds, former white farmers and what. They said, no, we're rolling off this thing over for 5 years. And some of the people were now expecting to get cash. And these are people running businesses. So we have to find ways of stepping in. So to answer the question that you didn't ask, I'm really excited. There are lots of good things, but unfortunately, these things are always politicized. Because a budget, as we always say, is basically telling your money what to do in advance.
It's a projection.
Yes. It's not just a projection. You're basically saying, our money, this is where we want to get it. And this is where we are going to spend it. And in terms of the laws of this country, that's why there's a lot of negotiating after the budget is presented beginning of the year. Last year, surprisingly, that's when it was approved, before end of year. Sometimes the whole process of getting Parliament to approve spills over into January. I think there were years when it stepped into February, and then these guys have to then, the Minister of Finance has to approve certain facilities, because unless you agree, unless Parliament agrees, nobody really has the power to spend government money. That's why you find in America, when they were saying there was a government shutdown, their equivalent of the Houses of Parliament, which is Congress, had not agreed to say, how do we spend this money? So the budget, like I said, the key thing is, these are basically projections to say, how are we going to get the money and how are we going to save it? So just to preempt the major talking point, to say, are you happy about this?
Now, even before we go to that, maybe let's take it a step back. What's your overall assessment then
of
the 2026 national budget?
It's good on too many points. The problem with our budget is it has always been part of what we call cash budgeting. The guy I usually talk about, who avoids paying his rents and then shows you his bank balance, is one-sided. So don't show me a bank balance without showing me who you owe. So the government accounting system, which is the public finance management system, is evolving into accruals, where it actually shows who you owe within that system. Because in the past, I'm not picking on my former prefect at Goromonzi, who was a former finance minister. In his time, he used to say we eat what we kill, and we were ignoring creditors, including the World Bank and other people. And the budget was balancing, because we would just collect taxes, pay salaries, and we were ignoring people who were supplying to government and not paying them. And remember when Professor Mthuli Ncube came in 2018, he started talking about a surplus, and the same people who were doing what he inherited started saying, you can't say a surplus without this. So for the first time, the budget and the public finance management system, which is the accounting, gives us an idea of who's actually owed what now. That's why when you look at the numbers now, we've got arrears, you've got uncleared payments, unvalidated, all sorts of things which people are interpreting different ways. That's why you find somebody who say $700 million for dams, ways that in the past, what just used to happen is you are shown what we think will come in and what we will pay. And we would not show that we haven't paid creditors. So there's been some evolution, a positive one, in the way that government accounts for this. And also when we bring in the audit function, it's now mandatory in terms of this particular budget to say, if you haven't produced financial accounts a certain period after close of debt, we don't give you the allocation. Treasury won't give you the allocation. Because what used to happen is some people would be running departments and funds and what they say, we are short-staffed, accounts are not coming in, we are not doing. They said, okay, you decide you don't comply. We don't give you that portion. So these are good changes. That's where we should go. Unfortunately now, some people are only seeing certain things now, so they're in shock. Let me give you a good example. Command Agriculture, when it came in, the government contracted outside parties. We know because the 400,000 families that benefited from the land reform are our families. People were getting fuel and whatever. That was not part of the budget system. It's only after several years that they said later on, no, we need to show Parliament that this is what we gave away. And all of a sudden, people started acting as if they didn't know that people were getting inputs. Do you see what I'm saying? So now, the system will tell you when you contract for something within the public finance management system. I hope I'm not getting too technical.
Not at all.
The invoice, it goes into the system to say, okay, you said you want to buy a new microphone, is there. So when Treasury then gives you the money to pay for that microphone, or when you then pay the microphone, the payment then comes in and then it's matched with the initial
The invoice that
yes.
was raised, yeah.
So that gets out. The problem with that, it creates another problem now. When you have a year like 2024, when we introduced the ZIG, where for 5 months that whole accounting system was out, not because ZESA was playing tricks, but it had to be recalibrated. So now there are certain payments that don't have this matching process, where people were paid, but because the accounting system was down, it had to be changed. Now we are dividing this by 14 and what for a while. And remember, the government also contracts other people to run this big system. So there are still some outstanding technical payments as a result of what happened last year, where the money was paid directly. I think we spoke about it, where UED, Treasury is now paying directly to so-and-so. It's because the system was out when we introduced the ZIG. It's like we were dealing in one currency, and then we bring in a new currency. You don't just continue capturing. Otherwise, it will look like you are now underspending or whatever.
So the budget, that was presented, does it pave way? Does it show an alignment of this sound fiscal discipline that you're talking about? Is there predictability now?
It's not fiscal discipline as such, which I think we love to have, but it's problematic. It's just that certain things are now visible within the budget. In the past, what could happen is, like I said, it was like technically like the guy who doesn't pay his rent and then he shows you a bank balance. He will look nice because you can't tell what he owes. Now what's happening now is within that system, he has to tell you what he owes for that time, what he intends to pay. So we see a better picture. But unfortunately, because our money has never been enough from the beginning of days, it will now reflect more on the negative side. And also the other thing is, like I said, that contracting that I said last year, certain things that were not in that system, there are certain payments now that are in arrears because there's now a validation process that needs to be done to say, okay, is this what we agree on? Did we do adjustments? This even goes back to the prior year. You remember when we used to have the old Zim dollar and we had the hyperinflation? There are people who, most of the people who were bidding, actually it was a requirement for you to bid in local currency. Then you translate that to US dollars. But what was happening now is because we had hyperinflation in prices changing and there was an auction system, sometimes when people got the foreign currency, it was no longer enough. And then decisions had to be made to say, let's say you had been given Zim dollars to buy 50 cars. When the money came from the auction, it's now only for 30 cars. So decisions were made within ministries, departments, and agencies to say, okay, we'll take the 30 cars. It's an exchange loss. And then we find a way of dealing that. Some of those things are what were then appearing in the audit report, and they haven't been cleared. So technically, like the example I'm giving, you were expecting 30 cars, but you know exactly at some stage, this person paid Zim dollars to the auction system, and he only got enough to pay 30 cars. So his failure to conclude the contract in the manner that we thought is not because he benefited. Actually, in some instances, if the people had said, okay, what do you call it, force majeure, act of God, we'll give you back your Zim dollar, the state would have lost.
I can imagine so. But as we're talking about that, I want to also, bring you, onto looking at the projected, revenue targets, also of interest, the projected growth rate, 5.6%.
It's actually projected to be lower than this year. This year was a good year.
This year, okay. So let's compare. That's this year was 6.6, and I believe next year will be 5%.
Because it's cumulative, 5 is huge. It's big. When you look at regional projections, 3% global is even less. Because remember, Mr. Trump and tariffs and whatever, and what's happening with South Africa, our biggest. So these numbers, they appear small, but they are big.
Are they realistic, I think, is our concern.
It becomes a question of semantics, which flows into what is the actual value of the GDP. It's not possible to measure
every transaction.
Yes, even in a formalized economy. GDP itself as a measure is not very accurate. Let me give you a ridiculous example. Let's say the two of us, if I spend 200,000 ZiG on healthcare this year, and you spend nothing, my GDP will show 200,000 and yours will show nothing. But who's better off? Me, who was spending all the time in the hospital, or you?
Me with all my cash?
No, on GDP you didn't spend anything, so nothing happened.
Well, ultimately, but it doesn't change my bank balance, you see.
Yes, the point that I'm trying to make is GDP as a measure itself is fraught with a lot of problems, because before we even talk about the measuring of it, we have to work with something. We have to have some sort of metrics. Now they are moving away from that to try and look at, some even try to measure happiness. There's something called
happiness
HDI,
index,
human development index. So the GDP is always going to be an estimate. Unfortunately, what happened in the last 3-4 years is there are certain econometric ways of measuring it. Like, for instance, if you want to see the number of miles that people drive, even though you are not looking at their dashboards, you could basically look at the number of cars and then the average fuel usage and the fuel spent. You get the point? Because you can't really go to everyone to say, I want to see so when you then say the average person drives so many kilometers.
No, and I know what you're driving at. Let's go there. Let's address the elephant in the room. The average person is earning $3,200, right? According to the budget.
Yes.
Is this accurate? Can you break that down for us? Or is this where, the averaging and the use of the system to calculate then becomes very topical? Is the average Zimbabwean spending $10 a day? And, are we really getting a realistic aspect from the, from the budget in that respect? So we must stop then striving for Vision 2030 because we're there.
No, we can't stop.
But we're there already, isn't it?
No,
according to the budget.
No.
Also, we're $600 short.
We're still, and it's a broad range. Actually, what could happen is by the time we get there to that number, for all we know, because what we are aspiring for is a level of income, a level of prosperity. We're saying upper middle income. So we are middle income, but we are lower middle income. We are not low income. There's low income, then middle income, but in middle income...
What is the difference, Pascal? Please,
the difference is basically to do with, we're trying to find a uniform way of saying standard of living. But you find that when you live here, in Harare, for instance, $1,000 does not mean the same as $1,000 in New York. So while those numbers may appear so low, there are people in the rural areas who've got better standards of living than some of us, but whose income is basically seasonal and doesn't even get to $1,000. Because what they just need, they've got their electricity from solar, which doesn't go off. They've got borehole waters, organic food. That's not factored into GDP. But we need some sort of measures to say, are we getting there? But I think the key thing that we need to notice is there was a major revision of the GDP figure because it was not making sense. To say when you
about the rebasing.
Yes, the rebasing. It's basically looking at it to say, no, but we can't be saying people are driving this much when it's this, the numbers are not adding up because there are certain linkages that are there. So what then did is, if we had continued to say, okay, we keep saying our old GDP was, say, 25 million, and then we just assume that it moved to 50 million in 1 year, then we'll have a 100% increase. So right now what's happening is the 6%, because it's now a percentage on a larger figure, it's impactful now, because 10% of 50 million, that's about 5 billion. Half of that, 2.5 billion. So it's a lot of companies doing a lot of things, especially if it's small companies. Our bigger companies, your Zimplats, your Deltas, your Inscos, are barely breaking $1 billion. So we are in a good place. The other problem also is the actual distribution of that income. Close to 2/3 of the people in Zimbabwe are classified as rural. So that comes with low incomes, but that doesn't mean it's a poor standard of life. Some of them, the guys who live on the farms, they walk to work. Whereas you and I are probably spending a good chunk of our income on fuel and combis and whatever. This doesn't happen for them. So there's that is the other thing that GDP doesn't address is inequality.
Let's talk about
So
inequality.
when there's something called a Gini coefficient where you're basically saying levels and what the higher that coefficient, the more terrible the society is. Yes, we inherited an unequal society at independence, but it's not getting much better. We are not as bad as South Africa, who are the most unequal society in the world. So that's where now the whole idea of taxation comes in. The three monopolies of government: monopoly to violence, I'm not saying the government is violent, the monopoly to print money, which they then give to the Reserve Bank, and then the monopoly to redistribute that compensation. There's a big illusion among most taxpayers, I blame it on the politicians, where they think if you are taxed, you must see the benefit to yourself. We talk about fair taxation and whatever. There's nothing like that. We just realize that for us to continue existing as a society and to support the legal fiction that is a government, you know all about that, we must take for some people. A tax is essentially a compulsory payment to the government for no service in particular. One of the good things that came out of this budget, which draws us into Section 302, Consolidated Revenue Fund, it outlaws those, what do you call it, retention funds.
Yeah.
Basically says people who are keeping little pockets of government money where you collect this tax, it comes to you, you then keep it. Says, no. So those balances in those retained retention funds, as of this budget, as of next year, must all be moved to the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
I also wanted to pick your brain, Pascal, on the distribution of funds between sectors or amongst the sectors. Which sectors in your minds I gained the most from the budget, and which ones were neglected? If there was a redistribution that could be done, are there any areas or sectors that could use a little bit more? And I mean, I know you also talk about the 24-hour round-the-clock operation and so forth. And manufacturing industry, but there's certain sectors that perhaps others have said are neglected or were neglected in this budget and should have been supported a bit more. Women's initiatives, social services, vulnerable groups.
I hear you there. Those sectors don't necessarily have to wait for the budget. But I'll pick one. Transport and infrastructure. the budgets, when you look at the numbers, it looks like they overspent the last year and whatever, but these were emergency situations. Roads needed to be fixed. We probably had under budget. And you know, the emergency road rehabilitation, the head of state occasionally had to step in. In healthcare, for instance, we all know what happened to Parenya a couple of months ago, where a home minister was not responsible for health went and said, no, we don't like what the president unannounced went there. So in terms of the actual allocations per the budget, that's not what's important in my view. You have to look at the areas again. Like for instance, the people who did the roads, they are owed money. There's a lot of money that's owed. There's a $700 million payment for dams. Remember, we're an agricultural society, we have to climate proof. We would go, the president would go and open dams, we would hear about these projects, we know about Kunje Dam. Let me slow down and make sure your listeners get this. That item reflects what should have been paid in terms of the contracts, but was not paid. That doesn't mean the dam was done. If there was a contract, for instance, for advance payment, where you say, pay us 700 million and then we'll start building your dam 5 years from now, like the Gwanda Solar Project or whatever. It doesn't follow that when you can owe a person before they deliver, because these are procurement projects. So a lot of people I've noticed, including some of my good friends, they're saying these figures, they're like, we want to see that dam. All that talks to those figures, they are contracts and payments that should have been made that time that were not made. That's why they are now arrears. So we would expect that this budget has a large chunk that's going to address arrears. But also the good thing about it is, when you talk about the payments that were involved, some of the money is actually there. Because we spend less as a country, we spend less than we had budgeted for. So it's not like the money was then spent on new things. Because of this, what do they call it, value for money, there are technical things that they are saying. They are now reviewing all those contracts to say, okay, when we contracted, did we get good value? What are we doing? They are revisiting the invoices. So some of the money, while we've got arrears in terms of the budget, but some of the money is actually still there in the consolidated revenue fund. What they also discovered midstream is those retention funds that I was talking about. You've got funds like Universal Services Funds, you've got the Broadcasting Services Tax, which goes somewhere. Now, Treasury, who is basically just the permanent secretary and his team there, they've decided, no, all the money has to come into the pot. Because what they were now doing in certain instances, they would realize that this particular agency has got this fund that's got money. They say Potras would have the money that comes from your telecoms company and they are not necessarily using it. You would have Noxim, the people using the pipeline, because it's a bit of infrastructure, they pay some fees, it's kept there. They were now having a situation where if there was like a healthcare invoice, they could actually send it to the ministry, department, or agency where the money is to say settle this invoice. So now what they are now doing, because you can't have one ministry or agent failing to pay. No, but we had a situation where something important unbudgeted for, or the government hasn't collected enough taxes so they don't pay. But in the meantime, it's like you've got money sitting in one current account and you're failing to pay your rent simply because it's not in the account where you write the rental check. Sometimes all you need to do is say, wait a minute, let me write the check from this. But long term, you then say, no, I can't be having money all over different pillows. I'd rather put it in one place where I can see it,
Hence
and then I use it when
consolidated revenue fund.
Yeah.
I love the way you explain that. Definitely, our listeners are in step with you. If you're just joining us, we are going through the post-budget analysis with economist Pascal Mandeya in the studio, and looking at some of the things coming out of that budget, our aspirations, projections for the year to come. Now, there's obviously the issue of taxation, and I think you did touch on that slightly. Many Zimbabweans, many economists like yourself, people in business, don't quite agree, and I want to share one such view, which is basically querying the removal of the reduction of the intermediated monetary tax from 2% to 1% to encourage ZIG usage, isn't it? And then the increase of standard VAT by the same 0.5% effective 1 January 2026. They also talk about withholding tax for digital services, and then the tax incentives for firms operating on a 24-hour model, gold royalties, and then the tax deductibility of IMTT for corporate income tax purposes. So, some are saying that, there is more taxes than relief measures, and this is being met with criticism by several industry leaders and economists. The proposed fiscal measures intend to raise money regardless of the wealth of local citizens and businesses in the formal sector without any sincere effort to address allocated inefficiencies. Now, this is coming from Tafara Matutu, market intelligence report that they did with Morgan & Co. What do you say?
What's the name of the new Commander Defense Forces? Matutu.
I believe so.
All right. So I have checked with Kate. But on a serious note, what the ministries, departments, and agencies asked for is 2.5 times what they got. And these are reasonable people. So, for us to expect government to do something, we have to be taxed or they have to print money or cause inflation. And they've decided there's a new 5-year development plan, the second NDS. And the government are asking for 2.5 times what they are getting. We can't say we are overtaxed. We are overtaxed relative to what? Because our aspirations, we are allowed to wish without quantifying. Like, for instance, let me give you a good example. Harare, 2,500 kilometers of roads. If they are 50% potholed, that's over 1,000 kilometers of road. For you to fix 1 kilometer of road, 500,000. So already, to fix the roads in Harare, for instance, you need 500 million, which is your Harare budget. But everyone will say they must fix potholes. Do you see what I'm saying? Nobody other than the people doing the work at the Ministry of Finance ever gets to quantify how much our aspirations are worth. I've done it with young, intelligent people I meet out there. They speak good English, very proficient in their subject, because everyone wants to talk about the economy. Ask them, so how much do you think the government should be spending? Some of them will tell you, I think 300 million. So when they hear that there's been a tender for 7 million, they think this person has taken off more than 10% of the budget. So there's that. Before people get emotional, they must see the bigger picture to say, quantify all the things that you want. If we've got 4 million kids in primary and secondary school and you want it to be free, and you know that the education that you want costs you $1,000 a term, $3,000 a year times 4 million, I think you're looking at $12 billion in education alone. We won't be able to fund it.
That's a huge figure.
Yes, but when people tell you we must have quality education that we had before, I went to one of the schools I went to was a former private school. We used to get everything. So now, there were few of us there. It was a government school, a former Group A. So, if you want the equivalent of private healthcare per year, people are probably paying upwards of $300 a year, isn't it, for you to get medical aid. Basic. You multiply that by 16 million, that's your whole budget. So very few people get to crunch the numbers. Or they say, no, we must get free this, free that. Which is, it's good to aspire, but we've got to pay for it. And the only way we can pay for it now is by getting taxed. That's why Professor Mtuli mentioned when people were lobbying to say, we don't like this tax, we don't like the ML. He says, okay, we can take it off. But we gotta bring something else.
I mean, there's quite a lot. There's the tiered export tax. You're talking about the 2% corporate social responsibility levy on coal. The increase in, I'm not too mad at this one, on gambling, so bookmakers and now they have to pay 20% of gross revenue, and the punters in Mandeya 25%.
What happens now is when you look at the extractives like your gold and whatever,
there's also a royalty on that. I mean, an increased one, which might actually.
It's not even enough, according to me. I think
It's
the whole
not
mining,
enough.
it's not enough, because if we own the resources, why must our government just get 10% of that? Do you realize all the gold miners are killing it now? Gold is at $4,000 something, I think, an ounce, something like that. These people were still mining when it was a quarter of that. And guess who's pocketing the cost of them extracting that mine, that gold hasn't gone up much. If anything, for some of them, it's gone down because of economies of scale. We are only getting 10% of. I would rather have a situation where we have production sharing agreements where we say, whatever you extract, we get